Listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
The New York Times has a piece entitled, you know what? I hate to read this. This is so flippin' stupid.
It's New York Times.
Okay, I'll read it
anyway. It's New York Times.
I'll read it anyway. And I almost said something I shouldn't say. Okay. The New York Times has a piece entitled, What does African rejection mean for the U.S.? The forced withdrawal announced last month of more than 1,000 U.S. Special Operations troops and drone operators in Niger and Chad should raise the alarm for Washington. In Africa, our policy of strengthening security partnerships rather than supporting democracy has not worked. The United States needs a new approach. Has the U.S. African policy been as benign as described? For insight, let's turn to our next guest. He holds the John J. and Rebecca Moores Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. He's one of the most prolific writers of our time. His latest books are entitled, I Dare Say, A Gerald Horne Reader and Acknowledging Radical Histories. And there's a new book soon to be released. Dr. Horne, the title of that new book, please.
Armed Struggle with a question mark. Panthers and communists, black nationalists and liberals in Southern California through the 60s and 70s.
Thank you, Dr. Gerald Horne. The piece continues, the troops had been dispatched as key part of America's effort to confront terrorism, and the pullout follows the government demands for new rules and regulations. Russia and increasingly Iran and other countries are allegedly stepping in to exploit a growing power vacuum in the region. There are a lot of holes in this piece, Dr. Horne. It's almost as though the U.S. policy is almost innocuous, and the piece doesn't really provide the analysis to say that a lot of the things that the United States claims to be there to support or defend are things that are as a result of direct United States action. Dr. Horne.
Well, most certainly. And I think that article inferentially reflects a growing crisis, not only within U.S. imperialism, but in the North Atlantic camp as a whole. What I mean is that Africa is now in a position to take advantage of the contradictions between and amongst, for example, France and the United States of America. We all know that as a result of President Macron's speech at the Sorbonne a few days ago, Mr. Macron is deathly worried about his European Union becoming a kind of vassal state of U.S. imperialism. Now, it may be too late to worry, but in any case, that opens an opportunity for African nations to take advantage of that particular contradiction. We all know that a few months ago, Mr. Macron was upset because U.S. imperialism elbowed France aside and scooped up a multi-billion-dollar submarine deal with Australia, leaving France high and dry out in the cold. France has struck back this week by inviting President Xi Jinping of China to a monumental visit in France. This comes on the heels of Mr. Xi Jinping inviting Mr. Macron to China just some months ago, whereby Mr. Macron dragged along with him a plane load of French businessmen. And this is obviously putting a thumb in the eye of the new Cold War promulgated by U.S. imperialism. France, obviously, or apparently, does not want to take advantage of that new Cold War, or at least sign up for that new Cold War with U.S. imperialism. And we also see that in Africa itself, after the regime change in Niger, July 2023, which was very hostile to French neocolonialism in that African nation, Washington was quiet for a while because it thought it could take advantage of French difficulties. But alas, what happens in the past week or two is that Washington has been given its walking papers as well, because it's being forced to abandon its so-called drone base in Niger And guess who's moved in? Of course, Russia has moved in. And so what you see is that the U.S. and its North Atlantic comrades are no longer in the catbird seat with regard to Africa. Instead, what you see is that African nations have figured out what is obvious. That is to say, that they can rely upon Russia to go after the religious zealots that are bedeviling these regimes, because they know that U.S. imperialism has a double agenda in mind with regard to religious zealotry. That is to say, it has allied with those who it has been sworn supposedly to combat. And that is obviously inconsistent with offering a steady hand of friendship to African nations like Niger. At the same time that Russia can fill the security vacuum, you see China can provide the kind of aid that U.S. imperialism can only dream about. I'm thinking of the 1,800-kilometer pipeline pumping Nigerian oil to the port in Benin on the Atlantic coast, with then that petroleum being shipped to China. The Chinese provided a $400 million down payment only recently to the Nigerian authorities, which will do wonders for the healthcare and education of the Nigerian masses who have suffered under the brutal lash of French neocolonialism. And so we see that there's a new international situation. And even when U.S. imperialism tries to offer a bag of goodies, for example, to Angola, which you may recall in the 1970s, U.S. imperialism was allied with apartheid South Africa in an attempt to foil the independence of Angola, and it took the dispatching of thousands of Cuban troops to foil that diabolical scheme. Well, now the worm has turned, and U.S. imperialism is trying to woo Angola because it is a storehouse of oil and diamonds and all manner of natural resources. And so Angola is willing to deal with U.S. imperialism in terms of building a railroad from Zambia, which is a major repository of copper, to the Angolan coast, where it can be shipped across the Atlantic. But at the same time, Angola continues to be one of China's major trading partners on the African continent. And you see that in Zimbabwe, U.S. imperialism is trying to redirect, to put it euphemistically, its misguided, wrong-headed policy towards that Southern African regime by imposing sanctions to drive the economy into the ditch, because the ruling party had the gumption and audacity to try to take back the land that had been stolen by European invaders as recently as 1945. But now, of course, Washington is looking longingly towards the lithium in Zimbabwe, which is a major resource for the green economy. And so it has tried to readjust, shall we say, relations with Zimbabwe, probably to no avail. And of course, the elections in South Africa are taking place later this month. It's no secret that Washington is hostile to the ANC government, because the ANC government had the audacity, like Zimbabwe, to drag U.S. ally Israel into the dock of the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And of course, U.S. being an aider and abetter of Israeli genocide in Gaza, has to worry about the repercussions for its own regime. And so we see that there is a major crisis for U.S. imperialism, for North Atlantic imperialism. There is a new international situation that has dawned. And at the moment, it looks like the United States can do little or nothing to reverse the tides of history.
You know, there's some realism in this article. They say with Washington now forced from the front line of fighting terrorism in the region, we'll leave that alone. It has the opportunity of taking a different approach, directly helping African countries deal with their economic and social problems. by pushing for inclusive governance and stronger institutions. So even when they say perhaps we've gone in the wrong direction, they say we'll use soft power now, basically, and we'll, do the USAID thing and say we're going to help governance. They didn't ask for governance. It's still imposing something that's going to benefit you on them. That mentality is what's getting them kicked out of Africa right now.
Garland, you're absolutely right. And to Dr. Horne's initial response, well, this is the New York Times. So to a great degree, what I take away from this piece is military intervention has waned. Military intervention is now coming to an end, and therefore soft power, coup d'état. We need to find more subtle ways to influence your policy is now the plan afoot. And it's interesting too that they talk about Russia stepping in and filling the vacuum, China stepping in and filling the vacuum, but they're not stepping in militarily.
Right.
They're stepping in on a win-win policy initiative.
The other part of it is that they leave this out. Russia stepping in by request. These countries are saying we have a historical relationship with you that involved you helping us get out from under the yoke of these people before.
Because we know you're an anti-imperialist country.
And now we finally got these people off our backs. And now the people that they got off your back is trying to say, how can we stay on their back? Well, the bottom line is the one thing that is not in this that they can't possibly say is perhaps we should allow the African countries to decide their future. And if they say to us, look, we've decided to go in a different direction, we respect that. No, we must find a way in. We can, by hook or crook, we can come in and dominate. Oh, that's not working. We can't fight anybody. Okay, let's send in USAID. Let's do something. We can't respect their right to choose their own path. That's the important thing that I get from this article.
Well, folks.